All right, I would like to welcome every one of us to the Yar'Adua Center and to this public policy forum, asking the question, what after oil? We'll start by singing the national anthem. So if we could all stand up. We may all be seated. I would like to introduce Mr. Nimo Basi to come deliver the welcome address. Mr. Nimo Basi is a Nigerian architect, environmental activist, author, and poet. He's the executive director of the Health of Mother Earth Foundation, HOMEF, and a member of the steering committee of Oil Watch International. He was one of Time Magazine's Heroes of the Environment in 2009. Mr. Basi is a fellow of the Nigerian Institute of Architects and has authored books on environment, architecture, and poetry. He received an honorary doctorate degree from the University of York, United Kingdom in July 2019. He co-founded Environmental Rights Action, Friends of the Earth Nigeria, to advocate, educate, and organize around environmental human rights issues in Nigeria. HOMEF is also our co-convener for this public policy forum today. Please, a round of applause for Mr. Nimo Basi.
Good morning, distinguished participants. It is a very special honor for me today to welcome all of us to this very special event organized by the Sheikh Yar'Adua, Musa Yar'Adua Foundation in partnership with Health of Mother Earth Foundation and with the solid support of Ford Foundation. We hope that this forum will trigger other inclusive engagements and platforms to help rouse us from slumber, ask ourselves questions very frankly, and take a peep at the energy and economic future of our country, Nigeria. The petroleum civilization is winding down. The handwriting has been on the wall for quite a while. The burning of fossil fuels has taken up the carbon budget and wrapped the earth with a thick blanket of greenhouse gases that have resulted in the hottest days in recent history and calamitous floods, wildfires, and other freak weather events. While climate change is a global crisis, we cannot deny the fact that we face peculiar impacts at both national and sub-national levels. For one, the global shift towards more sustainable energy technologies is bound to provoke a precipitous reduction in global demand for hydrocarbon fossil fuels such as coal, oil, and gas. And with nearly 86% of Nigeria's export value coming from fossil fuels, the global energy transition will have profound effects on our economy. The prospects of a zero-carbon future will also have a far-reaching environmental, social, and governance impacts on Nigeria. Most affected by this will be the impoverished extractive communities who have been treated as sacrificial zones since the first commercial oil well was sunk at Oloibiri 65 years ago. The impacts of climate change has already been experienced through sea level rise and coastal erosion, among others. These impacts have multiplied by the massive pollution, whose intensity, going by NOSRA reports, amounted to 1,300 oil spills in a 2-year period of 2018 and 2019, or an average of 5 oil spills every single day. The global tumbling of oil fortunes has led to shift in the calculations of fossil fuel companies. While some are rebranding by changing their names, others are shifting to other energy forms, and some are moving from onshore oil assets to offshore deepwater oil assets. This forum intends to build an understanding on the potential impact of the inevitable global energy transition on Nigeria. It also seeks to trigger improved inclusiveness in resource governance and reduce the power asymmetry in climate action. Finally, we hope to see in what ways government can enhance commitment towards the implementation of policies, laws, regulations, and initiatives that would lead to equitable economic, social, and environmental outcomes in extractive communities. This is a pivotal public event that will set the tone for further community-level engagements. And today we'll be learning from economic experts, industry players, as we figure out appropriate responses to the dramatic shift unfolding before us. We're also looking forward to hearing from government officials and community representatives. We believe that even if energy shifts produce stranded assets, actions must be taken to ensure that we do not end up with stranded communities. Again, let me say what a great honor it is to welcome all of us to this forum. Let's make this a major marker on the pathway to a Nigeria where every citizen has access to electricity and energy from clean, safe, and renewable sources. We look forward to a future where no territory will remain a sacrificial zone and where citizens are actively integrated into resource ownership, management, and energy production. Welcome to the event.
Please, can we have a louder round of applause for Nemo? He set a fantastic tone for this event and made some very salient points. Now I have the pleasure of introducing Mr. Uche Orji, who is the Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer of the Nigeria Sovereign Investment Authority. Before joining NSIA, he advised several global portfolio management firms and sovereign wealth funds, in his role as a global coordinator in equity division. He has co-authored more than 200 research papers in the semiconductor sector, as well as in the broader technology investment sectors. Mr. Orji obtained a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering at the University of Port Harcourt, Nigeria, and an MBA from the Harvard Business School. Please help me welcome Mr. Uche Orji to deliver the keynote address today.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Nemo, for the welcome address. It's a great pleasure to be here and be back to the Sheikh Musa Yar'Adua Center. I want to start by thanking everyone, particularly the trustees and the Director General of the Sheikh Musa Yar'Adua Center, Dr. Jackie Faris, and Nemo, and is Ambassador Dipolu here yet? They're here soon, okay. And distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I really want to welcome you all to what I think is a very important discussion and a very important topic in the life of our country. I've been asked to speak about climate and environmental resilience in the extractive communities. But I will also speak a bit more broadly to the role we play in the Nigeria Sovereign Investment Authority, our interest in climate change issues, particularly as an investment opportunity. Now, I know many of you have never heard of it from that perspective. I will try to speak to you about what opportunities exist there, because it's not just so much about anti-fossil fuel, which is what you hear about all the time. Every time climate change issues are raised, most African economies feel attacked. But sometimes you also have to sit back and ask yourself, what is the impact of this on me as a person, on my community, and what are the opportunities there? And many do exist, and I'll speak to them in the course of these discussions. But let me start by saying it really is my pleasure to lend a voice to what has become a global topic, and in some cases, an existential threat to some of our communities. I would like to place on record, actually, for my admiration for the work being done by the center. I remember the movie that you screened, documentary screened last time about oil spills. Quite touching or quite moving, quite frankly. I still remember that because for the first time, I have seen the impact of this. I studied chemical engineering at the University of Port Harcourt in 1985. And I remember one time in 1987 where I went as part of my research. It was actually a research I was sent to do that research by the current Minister of Science and Technology, who was my head of department, Dr. Yar'Adua. We collected rainwater, and the rainwater had oil droplets in it. Now, this was 1987. If you're a farmer and the rainwater has oil film in it, you are in trouble. And that, for me, was the beginning of my understanding of what the impact and the devastation that can be caused by the way we handle extractive products in our communities. And of course, I also remember looking into certain aspects of part of my job then as a student, a trainee chemical engineering student, was to look at the water effluent that was coming out of what is now Notori, used to be called National Fertilizer Company of Nigeria. And the work we did then, I remember, the water that came out of the plant was cleaner than the water in the stream because there was so much effort paid at treating and purifying the water. Of course, many years later, you look back at the communities and your heart bleeds because things have not been quite what they used to be. This is a serious matter and needs to be addressed. And I would like to say that from our perspective, if you look back at some of these things globally, there are many other aspects to this that is not just causing an impact in our communities, but globally. If you look at what the devastation of certain events in the United States, if you look at Hurricane Ida, look at wildfires, look at desert encroachment across several sub-Saharan African countries, and even here in Nigeria, where we continue to have flood issues across many communities now. It used to be certain parts, now it's everywhere. Flooding. You realize that we are being faced with a timely reminder of the challenges confronting our generation and the generations to follow with regards to climate impact. With news of these developments and the passing of time, these challenges have become more daunting and their scale more global and the consequences more devastating. Yet our response at the national level, at the individual level, can only be, at this stage, still be described as tepid, and we must do something quickly about the situations that we face. In response to the latest report published by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, has tagged the development a code red for humanity, warning that global warming has accelerated in recent decades, and every fraction of a degree of help will be very much, will count in our addressing it. Now, let me be clear. Climate change does not just threaten polar bears in Arctic. It threatens the socioeconomic prosperity of the world with an outsized proportion for emerging nations including fossil fuel-dependent countries like Nigeria. It poses enormous risk to the fiscal position of our government, the viability of businesses, and the living standards of individuals. As such, the effects of climate change are not merely an ecological problem for scientists and conservationists to worry about. It presents a major economic issue with direct implications for every facet of our society. It is for this reason that the NSIA, the organization that I happen to work for, has given significant attention to this risk by committing resources to deepen understanding of the risk, taking steps to embed ESG practices in our investment process, and making substantial investments in partnership with other institutions, both local and foreign, to promote sustainability in Nigeria. I will address a few things in the way I'm going to outline this presentation. Number one, why climate change matters for the Nigerian economy and institutions. Two, how we can work and must work towards building climate resilience in Nigeria. And three, what concrete steps we have taken at the NSIA to support the global effort in combating climate change. Why climate change matters for the Nigerian economy and institutions. Now, contrary to local belief and notwithstanding our lukewarm approach to climate change, Nigeria is heavily vulnerable to climate change, and it is classified as the 58th most vulnerable country in the world and the 22nd least prepared. This is according to the recent Climate Change Vulnerability Index of the World Bank. Nigeria is exposed to extreme weather events such as floods and droughts, sandstorms and heat waves. Almost 6% of Nigeria's landmass is estimated to be severely degraded at a time when the population is increasing in excess of 2% per year, with numerous sectors dependent on the integrity of land resources to deliver on key sector objectives. A preliminary inventory conducted under the Nigeria Erosion and Watershed Management Project identified 6,000 sites with degraded land, including both gully erosion and landscape context of dry lands. Now, let me just put a bit of context to this. Many of you may not have the pleasure of traveling across the country by road like some of us did many years back, and I still do sometimes more recently. The spate of degradation of land and deforestation is something that should scare all of us, because we are all going to face the impact of it one day, sooner or later. All of us will face it. So it's not just about emission control or spillage of crude oil. It's also about what is going on with deforestation across the country. Increases in temperature, changes in rainfall, droughts are all leading to the depletion of natural resources, desertification, and overall impacts on the livelihoods of the predominantly rural population, most of whom rely on farming, fishing, and raising livestock. Similarly, the increasing clashes between farmers and pastoralists, combined with the loss of crops in a country with a rising population, are driving food price inflation. There are real health challenges as well, resulting from the flaring of natural gas in the oil-producing regions of the country. For example, a recent report from the research group Climate Central found that low-lying coastal cities in some parts of the world may be permanently submerged by 2100, displacing 300 million people. An estimated 25% of Nigerians live in the exposed coastal region, a hub for economic activity and a source of 90% of our foreign income. This is in our Niger Delta area. This leaves Lagos, where experts say is less than 2 meters above the sea, in a precarious state. According to the National Emergency Management Agency, the 2020 flooding alone killed 68 people, affected 35 states, including the FCT. 320 local governments out of 774 experienced flooding, and over 129,000 people were displaced or affected directly by flooding issues. Therefore, at the risk of sounding alarmist, it is important to emphasize that the effects of climate change are real and are already upon us. And make no mistake, they will intensify if we don't do anything. For this reason, there is a need for an elevated focus on this issue by expanding the breadth of stakeholders and enhanced engagement to stand a chance in building a clear economic case for the fight against climate change. At every opportunity, it is important that we continue to emphasize that climate change will directly affect the balance sheets of businesses, including the financial institutions, and can pose a broader risk to financial stability from significant and prolonged climate change events. Now that I have attempted to draw a direct parallel between climate change and the economic prosperity of not only Nigeria as a nation, but its other economic agents and components, let me take this a step further by declaring that it is not only the climate that is changing. The changing behaviors of economic agents also give rise to significant transitioning risks. As the world becomes increasingly concerned with reducing the global carbon footprint, governments, businesses, and consumers are pushing for a transition to a more sustainable, greener economy. As this happens, some sectors of the economy may face declining demand, big shifts in asset values, or higher costs of doing business. For instance, the global efforts of government action to enforce the Paris Agreement could see the vast majority of the world's frozen fossil fuel reserves left in the ground, a harsh reality that stares us in the face at every turn. For emerging markets economies, the transition towards sustainability poses significant economic risks and trade-offs that may conflict with existing economic programs. For example, the goal to reduce the use of fossil fuel will have significant impact for the economic and development agenda of Nigeria, with effect on the foreign earnings of the country and, by extension, the value of our currency. These sustainability objectives will lead to, at least in the short to medium term, funding constraints and unpleasant social outcomes. Therefore, there is need for careful planning, broader engagement, policy coordination, and communication. How can we then work towards building a climate resilient environment in Nigeria? Now that I hope that I have dimensioned to some extent a clear case for action, I would like to provide some insights on how we can collectively make tractions towards building a resilient environment. First, the fight against climate change requires shared responsibility that involves an extensive collaboration across industries, sectors, private and public, as well as non-governmental institutions and donor agencies. As has been demonstrated by recent climate-related events, institutions across various sectors, governments and individuals, are faced with existential risk as a result of climate change. Therefore, there is a clear business case and incentive for a broader engagement to further the climate resilience agenda. So everyone must be involved. Secondly, there's a need for a clear policy at the national level to drive the climate agenda, with emphasis on the fiscal and transition risks. We need a deeper understanding of the impact of the risks on the economy, both from a central case and a tail risk scenario. Beyond the country-level policy, sector-specific approaches will also need to be developed to converge and limit the risk of a disorderly transition. From the oil and gas industry to the banking sector and other critical sectors of the economy, efforts must be made to cascade national policy to implementable programs in the sectors. For example, in the implementation of the Nigeria Sustainable Banking Practices, it should be monitored and measured to provide the basis for capital markets to reward banking institutions with sustainable practices. Thirdly, the financial sector, given its role in the economy, must invest in building capacity through the sharing of knowledge, expertise, and best practices in assessing and managing climate-related risk. Some of the things that the financial sector must do is to educate our people on the impact and how you can profit from carbon emission reduction units. Now, what is this? There are people in the world today who actually come and measure what you have done to impact the climate, be it from reforestation. So sometimes you plant a tree, plant a forest, people can actually come and measure what the impact of that is. And that measurement is actually traded in the international market as carbon emission reduction units. As a country, we must set a goal for how much carbon emission reduction units and how we're going to derive that we can trade, because there is a financial incentive to actually create these CERs and trade them in the market. This, I think, should be the role of the financial sector in educating people as to what opportunities exist here. Fourth, significant emphasis must be placed on disclosure and transparency to assist market participants in understanding how climate risk considerations are fed through business decisions. Internationally now, it's been required of companies. If you want to raise capital in the international markets, you must disclose. Companies in the oil and gas sector who do not have a way to balance this will struggle to raise capital in the future. That's what's happening in international markets. So this is a very, very comprehensive set of risks that we are all facing. And we must do something about it as a country in order to be able to be effective in how we play in this segment. At the NSIA, the question is, look, okay, you've said all this, Uche. So what is the NSIA then doing as an organization to help? There are 4 areas that we have taken concrete steps at. First, the NSIA is now integrating ESG practices in our investment process. We manage 3 funds at the NSIA. We manage the Stabilization Fund, we manage the Future Generations Fund, we manage the Nigeria Infrastructure Fund. The Future Generations Fund and the Nigeria Infrastructure Fund are now beginning to integrate ESG and sustainable practices in our investments. What does that mean? It means that if a company comes to us for capital and we're going to invest in them, we must ask them what are they doing to ensure that the climate is balanced. You cannot go to Niger Delta and leave oil spills and then let oil films come down from the rain and expect us to invest in it. That doesn't make sense. You must show us what your remediation measures are before we will engage with you in any meaningful way. The second thing we're doing at the NSIA is that we are now directly investing in this area. 4 years ago, we started out working with a group. And I remember when President Macron came, we signed an MOU on land degradation neutrality. What does that mean? Land that has been deforested, we're now looking to recrop those lands. Plant trees, create, I think for the particular one we're looking at growing both cocoa and palm on those places, but creating a level of biodiversity. And we're hoping that we can use this as a test case for how we can reclaim lands that have been degraded. Because if you don't, what happens is water evaporates, you lose that, and that quickly becomes desert. So we must do that very quickly. So there are direct investments that we're making in this area. The third approach we have done is next month actually, the NSI will be admitted as a member of the One Planet Sovereign Wealth Fund group. This is a group of sovereign wealth funds who have now endorsed a framework and principles for integrating climate change in our investment decision making. It will be a source of capital for the projects that we're trying to work on and for the projects that you will be working on as businesses or as individuals that we can then provide capital for. The other thing we have done, and we have recently signed an MOU with Vitol, which is a big oil trader, to invest about $100 million within the next 12 months in projects that avoid or reduce emission. Some of the projects we are looking at include gas flare reduction and clean cooking. Now, the clean cooking one is very interesting because we looked at this deforestation. We asked ourselves, what are we using the trees for? The biggest usage of our tree and biomass today is for cooking, firewood. Now, of course, you cannot stop that overnight because people have no way of cooking. So what we've decided to do in some of these places is to now find a way to bring about efficient cooking methodology. So this MOU was just signed. We're going to start implementing it, and hopefully in the next 6 months or so, you'll start to see concrete actions taken as looking at ways to provide clean cooking methods. Ultimately, the long-term goal will be how do we take our flare gas and convert that to low-cost LPGs for everybody. That will be the long-term goal because we're flaring the gas at the moment, and then that's a waste, by the way, that can then be used to turn into something that people can easily use as a way of cooking. And finally, reforestation. Forestry is a very important aspect of the work that we do. We've been in discussions with companies that actually invest in forests. Now, many of you sit here and you haven't realized that forest is actually a very, very important asset class. I remember when I was coming back to in 2012 to start the NSIA, Harvard Endowment had just paid $7 billion to buy a forest in Australia. Now, hard for you to understand how this asset class trades. Even I didn't understand it until recently. All of these things are opportunities. So why can't we, at a certain minimum, set a goal to plant? We had a goal as a country to plant 1 billion trees. Maybe we should go back and make sure we can implement that goal. It could be a way to actually employ a lot of people. These are things that we are now beginning to explore as an organization. So I will stop. There are many things to discuss here. There are many things I have raised, but I'll summarize some of the things I have said by saying, number one, climate change issues are an existential threat. It is not something that you look at and think is something that applies to other people. You are affected. For every time there's flooding in your region, it's climate change related. For every time there's an oil spill, even if it is people that illegally bunker and create spillages, we are all affected. Farmlands are affected. But like I said to you, my experiment in 1987 shocked me. But that was 87. Now think about what is happening today and the impact that this has on all of us. So there must be a collective sense of responsibility about how we fight these issues, because it's not just about the people that live in the Delta, it affects all of us. Secondly, financial services sectors, and this is my community, by the way, we only respond to financial incentives in many ways. But they also need to understand that the risk elements that you face are higher if you do not address these issues. But more importantly, there is now a financial incentive as to how to make money by trading carbon emission reduction units. Thirdly, the NSIA, we have taken this as an area of investment. We're tackling some of these areas. Gradually, we haven't got a huge amount of capital, but we believe that some of the things we're doing will not only set a tone for how one invests in climate-related issues, but also in attracting foreign capital to participate in the work that we do in this country. So therefore, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, this is the end of what I believe should be actually more pointing a compass as to how we should prepare ourselves and what we should be dealing with as a country, and hopefully creating an investment opportunity, not just for us, but for everybody to participate. Thank you very much for your time.
Please, another round of applause. Environment as a resource, forests as an important asset class. That's an important point that Mr. Uchoji has made that we need to keep at the back of our minds today during the event. Climate change is a global problem. Global cooperation is critical. And I think yesterday at the European Union State of the Union address, President von der Leyen stated that while every country has a responsibility, major economies have even more of a responsibility to help vulnerable communities. And of course, the EU made commitments to double its external assistance with respect to climate action. Today, we're going to hear from Mrs. Cecile Tassim-Pelzer, Head of Cooperation for the European Union delegation to Nigeria and the ECOWAS. Prior to this appointment, she served in the same capacity in Senegal. She's an experienced policy analyst with master's degrees from Pantheon Sorbonne University and the College of Europe. We welcome her to Nigeria. Please, a round of applause for her. Thank you.
Good morning, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. It is a pleasure and an honor for me to have been invited to deliver special remarks at this forum at the Yar'Adua Center. Let me start thanking the Director General of the Center for a warm welcoming. It's a center with which the European Union delegation in Nigeria has a long-standing relationship. Today's event revolves around the question of what after oil, with a particular focus on climate and environmental resilience in extractive communities. However, the question of now and the immediate future remains valid before Nigeria moves on to a well-diversified and climate-resilient economy. Emissions of greenhouse gases from human activity are said to be for over 1 degree of the global warming. And unless there are immediate, rapid, and large-scale reductions, the goal of limiting the warming to around 1.5 or even 2 degrees will apparently be beyond reach. Meanwhile, and as reported by the International Energy Agency, global energy-related CO2 emissions are projected to rebound and grow by close to 5% as the demand for coal, oil, and gas rebounds with the economy. This increase would be the largest single increase since the carbon-intensive economic recovery from the global financial crisis more than a decade ago. Most of the oil majors are still on track to significantly increase their oil and gas production between now and 2030. This is according to Rystad Energy projections based on the assets these companies currently hold and are planning to sanction. Likewise, in Nigeria, the newly signed Petroleum Industry Act allows 30% of Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation's profit from petroleum sharing contracts to be spent on frontier oil exploration. This may affect Nigeria's ambition to end gas flaring by 2030. However, we have also noted some positive developments. In particular, Nigeria's recent NDC revision, which added new priority sectors, including waste and water, and increased the conditional NDC target from 45% to 47%. In addition, the recently signed Petroleum Industry Act also commits to improving governance in the sector, among other objectives. We also commend the government plans for the Host Community Trust Fund, as also mandated by the Petroleum Industry Act. It will, amongst others, support local initiatives within the host communities to enhance the protection of their environment. Much, though, will depend on implementation of the fund. It is implemented equitably and transparently when it is eventually launched, if it is implemented equitably and transparently. On the EU side, we set ambitious policies and targets to fight the climate change at home and to assist the efforts of our international partners. By 2050, Europe aims to become the world's first climate-neutral continent. We have a target of at least 55% emission reduction by 2030. Furthermore, as already mentioned, the President of the European Commission announced yesterday in the European Parliament a new proposal of additional 4 billion euros for climate finance until 2027. And she has also called other global partners to follow the same path. Here in Nigeria, we support the country's just transition to a cleaner and greener economy. To this end, we collaborate with the Federal Ministry of Environment and the Federal Ministry of Power to develop a market for renewable energy sources, which are abundant throughout the country, ranging from solar to small hydro to wind power. We also believe that LPG can play a role of transitional fuel for addressing access to cleaner energy for cooking. However, the European Union can no longer finance natural gas infrastructure as part of its policy of pull out from all fossil fuel financing. We are, however, available to share regulatory expertise and technical advice for a sustainable use of natural gas, especially in the context of the recent EU methane strategy. We have also directed our support more specifically to the affected regions. Under the Niger Delta Support Program, we have supported the oil-producing region in creating employment opportunities and access to social economic services, water and sanitation, and basic rural infrastructure. Importantly, we have also supported public financial management reforms at the state level to improve the governance. These interventions have largely helped to address the main causes of unrest and violence in the region due to deficient governance and delivery of basic services as well as youth unemployment. Looking ahead, Under our new multi-annual program for Nigeria, from 21 to 27, so spanning for the next 7 years, we will continue to prioritize the objectives of climate change, renewable energy, as well as the goal of economic diversification and creation of decent jobs, especially for the country's youth. Our new spending target on climate in our new program for Nigeria is 40%, which is a doubling compared to our previous program. Under our first priority of area of intervention, green and digital economy, we plan to work in particular on climate-smart agriculture, access to sustainable energy using renewable energy technology, and energy efficiency, climate change and circular economy, as well as digital technology. In our intervention, as has been the case so far, we will take into account the needs of specific regions and communities, working not only at the federal but also at the state and community levels. In doing so, we will have to take into considerations, but also importantly, identify active and reform-minded authorities and partners who are committed to deliver sustainable services in a transparent and accountable manner. Thank you for your attention, and I would like to wish you all fruitful discussions.
A warm round of applause again. Thank you, Mrs. Tassin Pelzer, for those very important words that you've shared with us today, especially the global perspective and the EU perspective, and some of the support that you're providing for Nigeria to diversify its economy and become more climate resilient. Right now, we are moving to an important part of the program, which is our panel discussion. But before we do that, I would like us to please dim the lights so we watch a short video segment to set the tone for the conversation. Thank you.
Gas has been flared in this nation for as long as oil production has started.
The gas flaring in Nigeria is the largest single contributor to CO2 in Africa compared to everything else combined.
About 45 million tons of carbon dioxide is released into the atmosphere per day during crude oil production.
The gas that's flared is equivalent to the annual amount of gas that's consumed by Brazil.
The amount of gas being burnt is enough to generate power for all of sub-Saharan Africa. And yet we're wasting over $2 billion worth of natural gas every year just going up in smoke. This is really contributing to global warming, and Nigeria can't afford to add up to the problem that we don't have a solution to right now.
Imagine living next to a huge fire every day of your life, giant cigarette, as it were, attached to your entire community that you can never avoid.
So gas flaring causes diseases like cancers, leukemia, causes acid rain because of the sulfur and nitrogen oxides in it. All this affects crops, causes skin diseases, all kinds of breathing difficulties. So gas flaring is actually criminal.
The pollutants released into the atmosphere by gas flaring are not the only harmful side effects of oil extraction. The damage from oil spills on communities and the environment is invasive and sometimes catastrophic.
Yeah, if you look at the level of oil spills going on in the Niger Delta, it's one of the largest levels in the world.
Every single moment, there's an ongoing oil spill in the Niger Delta.
Ikarama in Bayelsa State was once a vibrant farming and fishing community. This is what happens when things go wrong.
Ikarama community has the highest frequency of oil spills in Bayelsa and the Niger Delta as a whole.
This ground is contaminated with the crude oil all over. Maybe you dig, let me say, 2 feet down, 3 feet, you will see crude oil.
Then apart from the oil spills, you're having toxic waste from chemicals used in drilling processes. You're having wastewater that comes from the process of oil drilling.
A place that used to be the food basket of Nigeria, the environment was degraded. Their source of livelihood was destroyed.
Our farms are no longer working well. The crudes kill all our fishes all around us. Food become a problem now.
So you're having food system polluted, water polluted, the land polluted.
The children, they always sick.
But what is causing these spills?
Sabotage has very high percentage. Maybe about 80 or 90% of the spills in such areas are attributed to sabotage. But if you go to some other areas, over 90% are due to equipment failure or operational failure.
So what is happening in the Niger Delta is people are spilling oil and nobody is taking responsibility. I don't blame the oil companies alone. I also blame the people that are breaking the pipelines.
But it's more complicated than individuals simply breaking pipelines.
The contractors of the oil companies who have the mandate to clean up after spills occur. Just in case they don't have enough contracts, they do influence a couple of community youths to go and, tamper with something here and there so that they can get the contract to go and clean up after.
They just give the boys about 200, 300,000 naira and then they smile to the banks.
Post sort of 2009, we've really seen an increase in third-party causes of spills. But that doesn't mean that the oil companies should be let off the hook for several hundred oil spills a year, which wouldn't be acceptable anywhere else in the world.
In the meantime, oil spill follows oil spill. Damage is extensive with virtually no rehabilitation.
The story of Bodo is a sad story. It's two spills caused by mechanical failure.
Since oil come here, if you catch fish and you wash it and you tear him better, you go see oil inside. When you just chop and you go hear the odor of kerosene. As you just breathe like this, the odor of kerosene will come back from your mouth.
When the spills occur, tide can carry these oil spills into the mangroves.
As you can see, oil used to be a mangrove.
What has been revealed from the United Nations Environment Program assessment of Ogoni environment, in fact, at the end they said it will require 25 years to clean the waters in Ogoni land. More than 3 years after that report has been released, one expected action to be taken to commence cleaning of Ogoni land. But all we're seeing are signposts in communities saying your land is contaminated, keep off. People are just in the middle of villages, people are living right there, and you're telling them the land is contaminated, so you keep off. Where are they going to go to?
Why militancy succeeded in the Niger Delta was the huge neglect. People are still drinking from the river the way they did when I was still a child. No boreholes, no good roads. So where are the money going to? And so when the boys rose up carrying arms, it's like applauding them. The community was applauding them. Yes, a Daniel has come to judgment. Another Izigboro has come.
You know that when somebody is pushing you to the wall, when you cannot bear it any longer, you bounce out. And that's the kind of, any moment now, that is the mood we are in, will be. As we are giving you good thing, you give us something, we'll take again. It's give and take life. We are in, that's the life we are into.
Our conscience reacts favorably, positively to equal rights and justice.
The effects of an oil spill are easy to see, but its influence on climate change may not be obvious. But when you consider the fact that every tree lost, every plant killed decreases carbon absorption, then the link becomes clear.
Thank you. So I would like to invite Mr. Nimo Bassi to please come to the stage to join the panel. We've introduced him earlier, and if you were paying attention, he was also the first person in that video. That video was shot 6 years ago. Things haven't really significantly changed since then, but Nimo has. I would also like to welcome Ms. Martha Abani to the stage. Ms. Martha Abani is an environmental and gender justice activist. She served as the executive director, or she serves actually currently, she is the Executive Director of Lokiaka, a Community Development Center, a human rights organization established to promote human rights of women. Prior to this, she was Lead Democracy and Accountability Officer at Movement for the Survival of Ogoni People, MOSOP. She obtained a diploma in Office Information and Technology Management from the Rivers State Polytechnic in Bori. Please, a round of applause for her again. I also would like to introduce and welcome Mrs. Lanre Chasore, who is a public policy specialist with a focus on policy design, measuring impact, and advocacy. She's currently Senior Special Assistant for Planning and Coordination for the Office of the Vice President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Prior to this, she was a Political Affairs Officer at the United Nations Department of Political Affairs. She's experienced sorry about that. She's experienced in building nonprofits, corporate social responsibility programs as well. She has a bachelor's degree in law from the University of Buckingham, a master's degree in international law and legal studies from King's College, London. I would also like to welcome Mrs. Bekeme Masade Olowola. Mrs. Masade Olowola is a social entrepreneur and founder of CSR in Action, a conglomerate of 3 sustainability-driven businesses dedicated to corporate social responsibility, policy development, advocacy empowerment, and sustainable development. She's a convener of the annual Sustainability in Extractive Industries Conference, the largest development-focused gathering for extractives. She produces the Good Citizen radio show, which has over 500 active listeners every month. Mrs. Masade Olowola obtained her master's degree in international human resource management from Queen Mary University of London. She was included in the Leading Ladies Africa 100 Most Inspiring Women in Africa list in 2019. Please, a round of applause. So you're all welcome to today's session. Our focus today, I think we will be looking at improving or increasing the understanding of the potential impact of the global energy transition on Nigeria. We're also looking at improving inclusiveness in resource governance. And we're looking at enhanced commitment in terms of policies and laws and regulations, also initiatives that lead to equitable economic, social, and environmental outcomes, especially for extractive communities. My first question would be to Nimo. This has been more than 60 years of oil extraction in Nigeria. What has that meant for oil-producing communities?
Thank you, Amara. I always wish that Nigeria never found crude oil because it's been 65 years of unmitigated disaster. The level of pollution of our communities, as we've heard, is such that right now, to think of a Niger Delta that is back to what it used to be is being very optimistic. We've seen from the challenges of cleaning of Ogoni land that to clean the entire Niger Delta will require so many lifetimes. Now, the dependence of Nigeria on crude oil resources has led to the abandonment of almost everything else. And as I said earlier, the entire Niger Delta has become a sacrificial zone, a zone that is just there to be degraded. So the communities don't have clean water, they don't have clean air to breathe, they don't have clean soil to live. So people are born in pollution, they live in pollution, they die in pollution, and they're buried in pollution. That is what oil has meant basically to the Niger Delta and to the communities where oil is found. And in fact, one of the things that amazes me is that Nigerians like to struggle to, nowadays, they had a refinery being built in Lagos, suddenly the value of property around that area goes up. rather than going down. How do you struggle to live near to a cancer-causing infrastructure? Those who live by refineries all over the world are in trouble. It's the same with all those in Port Harcourt, in Kaduna, wherever refineries work, it's not anywhere anybody should want to be near to. But Nigeria is a bundle of contradiction. And so I'll just hang it there for now.
Thank you. Mrs. Abani, you're very active in the community, in extractive communities. What's the current climate and environmental situation there at the moment? Could you give us a bit of a report? And how is the climate and environmental situation affecting the people there, especially the women as well?
Thank you so much. First and foremost, I'm a Niger Delta, and again, I'm a Ogoni woman. So when you talk about that, it just make me, ask myself, what is it that I'm really feeling or seeing? How am I actually living my life? I see a lot of pollution, contamination in the Niger Delta as part of us, just like Reverend Nemo has just said there. I see a lot of disaster in the Niger Delta area. Disaster, I say, is this. The physical disaster, as in we are having a lot of deforestation now, desertification, which wouldn't have been the case for a tropical area like the Niger Delta area. But we're beginning to see that because there's a lot of gas flares, well fires, so they are all destroying things around that area. I see a lot of poverty, hunger, and frustration in the Niger Delta area. I see a lot of violence coming up because of how the environment is, because you cannot distinguish or separate the human being from the environment. So when you get to your environment and see what you used to have, like the Niger Delta, which are grossly farming and fisher folks, today being denied all those natural resources they used to have, their livelihoods are being destroyed. They don't even have any hope about recovering those the natural resources, or their livelihoods that are being lost because of what they didn't cause, but maybe because of the extractive activities within that environment. So we see in the Niger Delta having low life expectancy. We celebrate the area. I use the word celebration because when we want to have politics or political period, the electioneering campaigns, you see a lot of posters being pasted around. But what we see in the Niger Delta is posters of burials, people that are there telling you maybe painful exit, too young to go, gone too soon, and all those things. This is what we see in the Niger Delta today because of what we live and breathe in. We live, we eat poisoned food. We drink poisoned water. If you go to Niger Delta, people have been talking about maybe like what the key speaker said there about the kind of business they should do. I can even suggest to us that go there and do water business, go into selling of sachet water and bottled water. It will really thrive for you. Why am I saying this? There is no potable water in the Niger Delta. So all you'll do and live on is to buy water. Where they sell a sachet water elsewhere, maybe 10 naira, you buy 20 naira in the Niger Delta area because that is what we have seen ourselves to be. So we have quite a lot. And of course, this is also pushing down to gender violence. When these people don't see work, the young people who are supposed to be the active set don't find anything to do. They resort to anger, and they ordinarily vent this on their, their spouses around them. And there's another thing we're also finding within the environment today. There's gun running in the Niger Delta today. People buy and sell guns because violence is what brings money today. That is the danger we see there. So I can go on and talk about quite a lot that we are facing, but this is the Niger Delta for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Abani. Mrs. Masade Olowola, would you be kind enough to present a CSR scorecard for domestic and international oil companies? These are the main operators in this environment that Mrs. Abani just described. What are they doing in terms of CSR? Is there something happening? How is that going on? Is there a difference between what's happening with domestic oil companies, for instance, and international oil companies?
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Every time I come to events like this, I think that oil companies expect me to say something negative. And I don't know how to say it, without obviously calling a spade what it is. Since we started CSR in Action 11 years ago now, there has been some improvement. Let me be fair. There has been some improvement. But when you listen to some of the things that have been said, the video we just watched, Reverend Bassi, Madam Abani, you know that there's still a lot more to be done. I think that the problem that we have with Nigeria plan, they will show you that they have spent, a huge amount of money within their communities. They will show you that, and they get really offended. I remember the last event we had that I invited Reverend Bassi to, and one of the oil companies there was really mad at us afterwards because he said, we brought them forward because they were the best in the space, and we're like, okay, come and talk about a case study. And he went and rocked the table and started talking about some of the negative stuff that they'd done, and they were really mad because they thought, oh, you set us up. And I'm like, it's not a setup, it's just what it is. But thinking about it, be more empirical. We have a report called the Corporate Sustainable Investor Report that we've produced since 2012. We had a short break of about 6 years, not too short, because we used to have to ask companies to fund the report. The report is a compendium of the CSR activities of businesses. And when we realized that businesses expected to do better for funding the report, we stopped it until we could get an independent sponsor. Now we have one for 2020, and we assessed companies around different things, ethical economics, which is their, governance processes, their stakeholder engagement approach. We looked at human rights and decent labor. We looked at innovation and all of that. And I'm looking here at the scorecard for the extractive sector, that's oil and gas and mining. And I can see that for human rights and decent labor, based on the criteria, which is, it's fine-tuned. We use global standards, but then we contextualized it to Nigeria. And the mean score for human rights and decent labor is just 38%. The mean score for ethical economics, which is their governance process, is 51%. The mean score for innovation is 26%. And we all know that, we are talking about transitioning from oil, but we're still producing oil at the moment. And we all know how critical innovation is to managing that process, to reducing the negative impacts. We've been talking about oil spills and the complicity of those who destroy the pipelines and all of that. But there's actually technology to monitor that, to identify spills immediately and all of that. Why is that not being done? And this is just 26%. Stakeholder inclusion, 40%. Environmental sustainability, 31%. And sustainability management, 25%. That's not very good. And, so what do I mean? I think that there's room for improvement. Recently, we developed something called the Community Engagement Standards before the PIB was rolled out. And it's something that we think that, companies can work with, with having enacted the act. Because it really tells companies steps that they can categorically take. I know that the Reverend always says, no need to even touch anything under the ground, just leave it. But we're already doing it, right? And even if we wanted to transition, we need to finish out where we are in a strong manner. And the CES, we've tried to, talk to businesses to say, this is, because it looks after the process of engaging the communities iteratively from the beginning and following through till the end when you have to leave the community, remediation plans and all of that. But, the companies tell you, I'm not sure we need it. So it really, they need to show better commitment. When you go to associations, the associations are being run by the companies themselves, and they're trying to do what's best to them. There needs to be some level of investment to be put into a proper structure for managing commitment, for managing communities, because what tends to happen is that whereas they can proactively avoid negativity, they let it happen, and then they spend a lot on legal fees and a lot on all these other things. So these are some of the challenges. We don't seem to understand the cost of allowing things to fester before addressing them. And this is something that I get a lot from my community manager friends within businesses. So finally, do I think that the local content companies are performing better? Unfortunately, no. Unfortunately, I would say no. You would think that they would have learned from the IOCs that came ahead. You would think that they would be more empathetic, more in tune with the needs of the communities, because they come out from within the communities. But it's a lot like the saying that, or rather research that proves that the more successful you are, the less empathetic you are to people that do not have. It just seems like that's the case with that. So I think there's room for handholding. I think that there's room for the government to provide some level of guidance. During the keynote speaker's speech, he talked about the Nigerian Sustainable Banking Principles. We need, the act is there, but the act is not granular. So we need for the government to be committed to encouraging, oil and gas and mining companies, and mining is coming right behind that really quickly, to perform better. Thank you.
Round of applause, please. Dr. Shasore, in 2017, the Vice President did a tour. It was called a peace tour, actually, all over Niger Delta communities. And on that tour, he engaged with communities, spoke to community leaders and different stakeholders within the community. What was learned from that mission, and how have these lessons been applied?
Thanks so much, Amara. Thank you for having me. You talked about the Vice President, so I think a few years ago, I accompanied him on that tour, as a matter of fact, and I regret to say that I suppose what you did see was a great deal of environmental degradation communities who really were just who are really just seeking inclusion in the Nigerian dream, whatever that is, like a lot of other communities across the country. So that was clear. In terms of the lessons learned, again, that tour was not the beginning of participation or government intervention or partnership in addressing or the remediation that needs to be done in that part of the country. For example, if you take a 4-year period from, say, 2010 to 2014, over 7 trillion naira was invested in that region to address all the challenges. But since then, since that tour, further work has been done. The implementation of the Nigerian response plan to climate change, which was passed in 2012, and that has continued to be folded into various medium-term plans and various documents, policy documents in the country, culminating in the Ogoni cleanup, the implementation of the Ogoni cleanup, which was launched a few years ago. So all of that continues. I know this may not sound like a lot, but there's such a great deal of degradation that has occurred in that part of the country, and efforts continue to address that. Things like modular refineries, the PIA Act is another step in addressing addressing the remediation that needs to be done, especially the new provisions relating to host communities. But again, in terms of lessons learned, as we prepare for the end of oil, as a country like Nigeria, an oil-based economy, an oil and gas-based economy like Nigeria prepares for for the end of oil. One thing, a nuanced message I think that we are refining in our engagements with partners is that it's all very well to divest from oil and gas investments, etc., but it's really existential for us. It affects us, I think, as Uche said earlier, from a fiscal perspective and also from a perspective of livelihoods. So it's great that everybody wants to divest from oil and gas investments, etc., but it affects us in more ways than one. Not just that. So we would like to see a continuation of this, not to the detriment of communities across the country in Nigeria. We'd like to have these investments continue safely so that we don't have what we saw in the film previously. So what we're looking to is really a continuation of investments in a safe way that promotes safer and more economically prosperous societies like ours. I'll just leave it there.
Thank you. A round of applause, please. Dr. Shasori, I'm going to stay with you for a bit because I think you mentioned something about divestment from oil. And, you know, it appears that quite a bit of that is out of our hands in terms of the investments. I think recently, I think this was in August this year, NNPC acknowledged that Nigeria is facing another wave of divestment of oil companies. I think it was in May that Royal Dutch Shell announced that they are in conversation with the federal government to dispose of their own assets. There's also indication that we're not getting financing from financial institutions because they're trying to balance their portfolio and moving away to lower carbon investments. I think that's already affecting our production because I think this year we've only managed an average of 1.6 million barrels a day as against our capacity of 2.3 million. And a recent report that came out, I think that was last week, stated that Nigeria has seen a 62% decrease in the rig count, which is a major indicator of activity in the upstream. Is this end of oil come early for Nigeria? And what are we doing? Are we prepared for it? I mean, congratulations on the PIA, but, you know, is this something that is focused on this trend, this event that's happening?
Well, I mean, so the end of oil is here. Everybody knows it. We're not going to deny it. Nobody in Nigeria is a climate denier. However, as I said, there is a nuanced message. There's a nuanced narrative for us. This is what we live on, and there is no shame in that, as long as it is safe for our communities and as long as it supports our economy. So what we would like to see, everyone talks about energy transition. The speaker from the European Union made reference to that. So Nigeria has international obligations, like a lot of other countries around the world, to meet its commitments to transition away from oil and gas, and that's fine. But what we are saying is that we are a gas-based economy. We would like to continue to explore gas safely. Uche talked about its importance for clean cooking. There are lots of, and we're working on that through the NSIA and also the Ministry of Petroleum as well, to make sure that we can use LPG for clean cooking, which is safer for a lot of our communities. A lot of women in our communities and other vulnerable people will rely on this and will need this to safely live and develop. So there's that. So I think your question was, are we prepared? We are prepared. We have a nuanced message. And I think that the president will be engaging with other member states at the General Assembly this year and the Conference of Parties, the COP26 conference in November on this, that we would like to continue to explore gas. It appears that the world is ready to divest away from gas. They're not discussing this with us. They've taken this position. And also note that the CO2 emissions in the world, Africa is only responsible for about 0.5% of that. So that's another interesting thing that we ought to pay attention to. The other interesting thing that we ought to pay attention to, and the nuance, is that while everyone wants to divest, everyone is going renewable, Africa is an energy poor continent. We all share 81, all of us outside of South Africa on the continent share 81 gigawatts of power. There are 792 million people without access to energy around the world. 90 million of those are in Nigeria. We need energy in order to develop. We need energy for jobs, we need it for production, for agriculture, for productive use, basically. So, and gas is an important part of that. We will, and we are, moving towards renewable energy for power, but for a grid, for us to be able to have a durable and reliable grid, you also need fossil fuels to underpin that, so that then we can put in all the renewable mixes into it to sustain it. So yeah, it's just important for us to recognize this as well. We recognize that we've got to do a lot of environmental remediation to support communities, but we'd also like to continue to explore gas as a transition fuel. The rest of the world, we do not have as much responsibility as the rest of the world for the emissions that are in the world today, but somehow we are being taken along with them, and that's something we have to pay attention to. Sorry, I think I took up too much time.
All right, no problems. Thank you for your candor and your answer. I'll ask Nemo the same question. Has this day, Dr. Shasore says, end of oil has come. Has it caught us unprepared? What's your response to that?
Well, we had the warning for many years. We're not just talking about this for the first time in 2021.
Yeah.
And Nigeria has had enough time to prepare to transit from fossil fuels to cleaner energy forms. But apparently, not much has been done. Renewable energy is still contributing very insignificant levels of energy in the energy mix in Nigeria today. We don't really see any indicator that we are taking the matter as seriously as we ought to. And the communities are suffering because of this, because when you mention about the vast number of Nigerians who don't have access to electricity, we have to remember that gas flaring, for example, did not start today. It started in the 1950s. In fact, in 1963, the British government did write to one of the major oil companies that, look, Nigerians will question this act one day. And that matter has been questioned in the court, it's been questioned on the streets, there are campaigns on it, and government just simply has been ignoring the fact. Said gas flaring was outlawed in 1984 when the present president was a military head of state.
Yes.
And so now we're talking about 2030. We talk about 2020, now it's 2030 because the World Bank has set 2030 as the deadline for ending gas flaring in the world. Some of us don't even believe that target because we don't see the indication that this is going to be done. And so it's very depressing when we look at pronouncements, promises, and then action. Now, oil companies are divesting. Yes, a company like Shell is ready to sell off all its onshore assets, but it's not leaving Nigeria. They're moving to deeper waters. They will sell to, as Beckham said, the Nigerian companies buying these onshore assets don't appear to understand that they are also buying up liabilities. And the IOC should deal with the issue of liabilities before they buy these onshore oil fields, and then allow them. If they just move and leave the liabilities, the Nigerian companies know the communities and their sons and daughters of the soil, and they could just tell the people, look, we are going to do something, and the day they will do nothing. Some of them are already very notorious in terms of oil spills already. Just a few, they've just bought the fields for maybe 1 year, and they're already experiencing so much oil spills occurring, and then they're shifting responsibility to the company that they bought the field from. Whereas this indicates that they've not really sorted out who bears the responsibility for ancient facilities that ought to have been refurbished, but which they are buying. And the corporations who are moving offshore, they know what they're doing. The deeper the water, the less royalties they pay to the Nigerian state. If it gets to a point, the water is deep enough, they won't pay any royalty at all. And so they're going to be moving deeper because they want to make more profit. They want to avoid responsibility. The oil spills in the maybe 100 kilometers out there may not be noticed on time. or they could just use chemicals to push the spill to the bottom of the ocean, damaging the aquatic ecosystem. Or some of the spill will come to the coastline, of course, like we've seen over the years. So the divestment is something that government needs to interrogate very clearly. And as of course we've heard this morning, if there was a sense of urgency in terms of divestment, in terms of diversification of the away from fossil fuel sector, we would have seen that indicated in the Petroleum Industry Act that has just been enacted into law. Now, with 30% of NNPC's profit going to searching for new oil fields, that doesn't tell me that government wants to move away from this sector. Because you're going to already in the current oil fields, there are a lot of, within the sector that we know are have oil and gas, there are a lot of areas that are yet to be developed. And so you are not developing this one, you are going to search for where you are not sure. So 30% would be spent, and then at the end we just say, well, we spent 30%, we didn't find anything. And you won't blame anybody because it's for exploration. And so already it's an agenda to waste resources. And then we're hearing about host communities funding. I know you haven't asked me that question, but let me just comment on it. The money going to host communities, 3% going to the host communities. But you know, the worrying thing about that 3% is that the oil companies have the upper hand. They are called settlers in the bill, which is like settlers, if I understand it by ordinary English, which is very colonial. And they are the ones who determine who is a host community. The oil companies determine who is a host community, and we all know that the fact that you put an oil rig here doesn't mean that the oil is is right here. You can drill from the next village, but the facility is here. And then there's an agenda for divide and rule, which will create more tensions in the communities. And then the trust fund to manage the money. The oil companies will determine who are the board members. And then the Senate added in consultation with the communities. That was the intention of the bill. So now the companies will determine who is on the board of trustees to use the funds, but in consultation with the communities. So who has the upper hand? Is the one that is coming to consult the community that has the upper hand. Because they consult with the community doesn't mean that they accept what the community says. So communities are busy talking about how they're going to spend the money, if people are going to squander the money, if the people are going to, all kinds of negatives will have, but the money may not even come to the communities because the same bill says that if there's some facilities breakdown like oil spills and third-party interferences or whatever, then the money will be used to repair those facilities. Now, over the years, wherever there's an oil spill, the first thing oil companies say is third-party interference. They said that in the case of Ebubu Ejama, the oil spill that occurred in 1970 at the end of the Civil War. But just recently, the companies have accepted that they were responsible and they're going to pay compensation. After 30 years of litigation, after 50 years of one oil spill, that indicates to me that a lot of time they claim that it's third-party interference is just a way of avoiding accountability. And this is why communities really need to learn, to equip themselves about how to gather evidence that when things happen, gather the evidence that we can use to press for remediation as well as for acknowledgement that these communities are not criminals. Because they live in those communities, it's not in their interest to keep polluting their water, polluting their farms. I've been offered tubers of yam, as in communities in the Niger Delta, that when you cut, you cannot use the yam for anything. But yet the people know that this tuber would not be useful, but they're still planting because farming is our way of life. People can't avoid it. They farm it. They know the product will not be useful. People catch fish. Recently, I went to one community. I was in Goy 2 weeks ago. The community elders were waiting for me. They knew I was coming. They were waiting for me. And they were draining a fish pond beside the polluted creek. And they all sat, and I stayed with them. They harvested barracuda, very big fish, and they offered me the fish. Now, would I say I'm not going to take the fish? I mean, they spent the whole day draining the oil, the well. And, you know, they do this, they know that the fish they're going to catch is contaminated. Children are swimming in contaminated water. I mean, I'm just saying this because I think we really need to have a higher sense of urgency in this matter. Because the people living there, they are Nigerians. And the children growing up there, they are Nigerians. Life expectancy of 41 years in the Niger Delta is incredibly low for any part of the world. I know nationally, people are looking at me surprised. Nationally, it's 56 years for women and 53 for men. If that is not low, tell me what is low. So we have a lot of problems because what happens in one part of the country affects people in other parts of the country.
Thank you, Nemo. A round of applause, please. Now, Mrs. Masade Oluwola, we've had an opportunity to learn about what happens when oil is no longer flowing. Oloibiri, the first oil well that was drilled in, I think it was 1956, is dry now, and there's a case study about it. What can you share with us about what we can learn from that experience? What happens when oil is no longer flowing, when it's shorted?
What happens when oil no longer flows is that we still have Nigerians in Nigeria. So thinking about it, that whole notion about us having a resource course and everything, I think that the countries that are doing well currently, if they had the same resources that we had, they would still do well. I think it's an attitudinal problem that we have. And that has, I think we've said it in different ways over and over again during the course of this conversation. That's why things haven't worked in the communities. Yes, extractive companies, extractive activities have negative impacts on communities. But there's a lot of value that can be gotten out of it, financial value that could be properly utilized. That's not been done. We all know the governance situation in the country, which cuts across every sector. It's not just oil and gas. It's just pervasive, and it's just the norm. It's almost as though everybody is waiting their turn to perpetuate ignominy. And I mean, what happens after oil? If I again look at the Oloibiri situation, many years ago, I met with Sir Mahmoud Stewart. It was an event on the side of one of the UN General Assemblies. I think it was the Clinton Global Initiative. He was the first managing director for Shell in Nigeria. At the time, he was the chairman of the United Nations Global Compact Foundation. And it was right at the beginning of my career at CSR in Action, when we still believed that everybody wanted the same thing that we did, change for Nigeria. And I was having this conversation with him, and he said to me, the problem that's happening in Nigeria now is the same. I mean, he's an older man, he's in his 80s or something like that. And he says, we're dealing with the same challenges that we dealt with years ago. It's the transactional approach of dealing with communities. So everybody by now knows what needs to be done when addressing communities. So even if it's not oil and gas communities, I mean, telecommunications companies deal with communities, they build masts and everything. But we repeat the same mistakes over and over again. The fact that we do not understand that we need to engage the people within these communities like they are human beings. The fact that you realize that just because a person doesn't have a certain level of education doesn't mean that they're not smart or that they don't have expectations. The fact that you know that if you get a certain value out of something, you have a responsibility to give something back. The fact that engagement is not one-off, it's iterative, it's inclusive, it's for the best intentions of all parties. So that's why I started off by saying that, beyond oil, and learnings, what we need to do is to learn as a people that avarice, selfishness, all of that would not take us anywhere, no matter what we decide to do as a country, okay? Since we've been working within this space, one of our core, I would say, because CSR in Action is both a non-profit and a consulting firm, we became a consulting firm out of necessity. The passion was non-profit, everybody works together for the good, but then you started realizing that you would compromise your values if you didn't make income for yourself to basically pursue your activities. And we engaged the people the necessary people within the communities, and then, as I said earlier, we then came up with this community engagement standards. And one of the final standards, like I mentioned earlier, is the handover process, the decommissioning aspect, and the shoddiness with which these things are done. And then you realize that all of the things that need to happen require linkages with other relevant ministries, other relevant agencies, and nothing seems to be working together. If you want to track the PIA, if you want to track any measure that the government puts in place, you would need, for instance, as it relates to oil and gas, you would need DPR, you would need NCDMB, you would need all of these bodies that seem to be working in silos and that do not seem to understand the value of working together. If you look at Germany's Energiewende, that's what has happened, okay? You're transitioning, but if you talk to NDC and the whole business around the Paris Agreement and measurement, they can't get data to measure how well we're doing. So we're signing up to all of these many things, and really there's no tracking of what is happening. Okay, so I think that's the major issue. There's been a recommendation, work with these different parties to form a multi-stakeholder committee in order that these issues are addressed. But you know how it is, it's a lot of recommendation, but little progress. And so beyond oil is really Nigerians trying to become a better version of ourselves. I can tell you that it could be agriculture, it would be renewable energy, it would be this, but there's so many hindrances to many of these things happening beyond the infrastructure, more towards the attitude. So I think that we need to think about that, think about the value reorientation of the average Nigerian, because it is us who are in whatever positions within the businesses, within government agencies. It is us who, when Nigerians say, now who education help and all. When you go outside Nigeria, it's a case that we are the most educated in the country, like the US and all of that. But how are we applying that education here? This is the question. The question is, how ready are we willing to transition? Reverend Nemo talked about the fact that we've known for a long time that this time would come. But what did we do about it? And we have so many smart people. We have these discussions. We make all these recommendations. Some of us put our hands in our pockets and contribute towards making the process work. But what is the outcome? What is that push through? And that obviously brings it back to visionary leadership and harnessing everything that we have together to work for us.
This is a question to anybody on the panel. Do we have a decommissioning policy for oil installations? Is there anybody that's aware of a process or a policy there? Just quickly, because this is...
yes, I know Martha is going to answer also, but really in every mining contract has a decommissioning clause, whether it's solid mineral or oil mineral. So actually, the oil companies, when they finish extracting, for example, the case of Olobri, that oil well is there as a museum piece. It's been designated as a monument, but it ought to be decommissioned and the place restored. So that should be done, because each oil well is not just the wellhead.
Yes.
It's about the pits where they put the produced water, where they put the chemicals and other things. The entire area ought to be decommissioned. That's part of the cleaning. And that is one of the things that United Nations Environment Program recommended for Ogoniland, that while the cleaning is going on, there should be decommissioning of the decrepit, all the ancient facilities that dot the area. And that has not been done. So there's a policy. The Solid Mineral Act of 2007, it's a requirement that you even deposit some money so that when you finish mining, you restore. No mining pit can be restored to what it was naturally, but at least some effort should be made to restore it. So there's a policy for that. There's a requirement in the contracts for that.
Okay, that leads us very nicely to Mrs. Albani's question about cleanup. How is it going? The Ogoni cleanup. We hear so much about it. Nimo's talked about it. Dr. Shasori has talked about it. Is anything happening? What's the progress?
Progress. For me, I think is a relative word if you ask about progress. Yes, because something has happened or something is happening in Ogoni land today. We have contractors on site. We had the first 21 contractors being mobilized to go clean this. Of course, what they are doing, I said, is simple and semi-complex site cleaning that is ongoing for now. So we have contractors working. But the caveat to that is, how is it really going? A situation that we see as an emergency, there's a lot of delays in what they are doing, and there's back and forth on certification about the job, what they are putting down, the contractors' work, the output about the work they are doing there, and communities, concerns over what they're also doing in the area. And just like we talked about decommissioning now, there are some areas that they've actually carried out 100% completion based on a NOSRAS certification. And of course, maybe the internal, this is done by high prep. But the areas have not been decommissioned. And even where they carried out the cleanup, where they so say they've had about 100% completion, they still find oil there. The place is still polluted. And this time around, no one can say it's coming from maybe third party or maybe sabotage, as they used to say. It is still saying that there's a challenge about the cleanup. And then, yes, there is work. Why will I always use the word yes and go back and forth? We have different components of the cleanup. They've carried out maybe health assessment about the 1 week task they carried out recently. Maybe that was the flag off, and maybe they might do more. But we don't really understand the content of what they were actually assessing people's medical status on. The one they did last time before this current health chip was on malaria and other minor illnesses, which wasn't even captured in the Ogoni UNEP assessment and report. So the Ogoni people, we've been querying those kind of health audits on the people. But now they also have an issue around water. They've mobilized about 6 contractors to go carry out water drilling. But the challenge we're also having, or our concern as Ogoni people, is that we don't really know the specification of these contracts, whether it is just for them to drill and reticulate the water, or that they are going to drill, reticulate, and then maybe have a treatment plant attached to that. And if they are going to have treatment plant, will it be per site, or they are going to have a central one that will connect to these areas? Owing to the fact that the Ogoni area, the reason for this water is because the surface and underground water are highly contaminated. And then there's also a challenge the people are also coming up with there. Of course, in every area or community, you find some technical experts too. Water, this borehole draining is not a thing that is, alien to any environment, especially that we don't have water anywhere. So people go into this borehole drilling all the time. So what they are bringing in there to Ogoni environment, people are also looking at it and wondering if it's not the usual borehole sinking they are trying to do there, because they expected to have experts coming in to drill that water. knowing that you cannot even boil oil polluted water and have good water. What are the technicalities? What other, let me use the word technical, this thing are they bringing in to extract oil from this water? Because that is a major concern in the Ogoni water. Those are challenges and concerns people are having. And then for the areas that have been certified as clean, they are doing some backfilling now. Communities are also complaining about the pattern of backfilling that is not asymmetric, and that these areas are now very close to human habitation due to population growth. Before this time, some of these sites they are cleaning were actually forested areas, but because of oil spills and several challenges that they're going to be facing in terms of land pollution, there's a lot of movement, encroachment to those areas. People are now like relocating to staying around that area. And then with this backfilling they are doing, which are not being compacted, there is fear that it cannot be used for any structural project, going forward after now. And if that is the case, that means that area will still be left fallow. Then there's also a concern we are having about the vegetation we are seeing in those areas. One, most contractors that went out to work, I don't want to say all, most contractors that were mobilized to work didn't actually carry out a kind of an assessment, this is what they call it, a baseline of that area. Want to even understand the biodiversity that were actually there. We know that yes, things happen, but to understand now, even come up with indigenous knowledge about what would have happened within that area, what were the necessary vegetations there. So what they have now, they are beginning to see alien plants or vegetations coming into that place. And again, beyond having the alien plants coming in, they are not also promising. They don't look good. So it then means there's a concern about the nutrients they fed the soil before backfilling. So these are some of the concerns that are coming up around the project. But be that as it may, they've gone on to have the second set of contractors being also mobilized to site. And so if I want to take it across board, I can say that the cleanup progress, some are 100% level completion, some 95. We have 50, 30 and that. And of course, with what HiPrep and NOSRA are doing, for those that they feel they've not met the certification or the intervention target that they gave or value, they are asking them to go back. So we cannot really stand up to say a project that was initially signed for 6 months and we still have some persons there almost 2 years on the field, it's a concern if we want to look at that holistically. And then if you look at the number of people that have been so mobilized, the contractors, the first was 21 and the second was about 30 to 36. Then we should have an influx of people working in that area. We don't really see that holistic, a crowd of contractors, or let me use the word aliens working in the Ogoni environment. I use the word alien because most of the contracts were not really given to Ogoni contractors. So we have foreigners doing this work. And then there is a lot of complaint around the issue of capital flight. That is, this is actually bringing in, because if we look at the UNEP report's recommendation for the Ogoni environment, and an opening statement by the then executive director of UNEP, he has stated that the project was supposed to serve as an empowerment strategy for the people. But the Ogoni people are not really seeing themselves benefiting from the project per se. And a project that is supposed to last for about 25 to 30 years, ordinarily is supposed to be like a lifetime project for people. If we look at the civil service time for job time, or I don't know how to put it, which is like 35 years. If you find yourself working in the Ogoni environment, it already means that you've already gotten a lifetime job. But we're not seeing that really playing out. And then the labors they use are still, they still work as contractors, and not even just contractors, they earn daily pays on what they do there. And we are concerned, like I am here, our challenge is, even though they employ our people to do the work, what about the women? We don't have that coming in. Where you have about 30 persons, you only have like 2 women working there. And these women will either be cleaners or site nurse working in that environment. So that's what we are seeing. And then, if you want to talk about the cleanup and its progress, the decommissioning, which is supposed to be a task they are supposed to carry out before even going into the cleanup, they've not really done that. And that means there's still going to be repollution. There are manifolds that were not even, they carried out JIV on them because of the spill that occurred at the time, but were not addressed or attended to. Those manifolds or those sites are still, still having spills. They are still, having spill is still occurring around those areas. And then if you say you are doing this kind of cleanup, yes, today we have a reduced or a reduction in the activities of artisanal refiners within Ogoni environment. They've talked to them, and at least they are beginning to respond to that, leaving the creek for the cleanup to take place. But is it really sustainable? The sustainability I'm talking about is this. There were some funds earmarked for these people to enable them leave the site, leave whatever they were doing with the pipelines, so that spill will no longer be there, and then the cleanup can actually take place. But that fund has not really been released to the people. So even when they talk to them, they are still very, very expectant. And who knows what will be the case when they stay after a while and nothing is given to them. So we have all this as epileptic situations around the cleanup. But the word is yes, cleanup is ongoing. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that very comprehensive report on the Ogoni cleanup. I'm very happy to receive it, and I think we've learned quite a bit about what's happening on the ground. Earlier, Mrs. Tassim Pelsa talked about how Nigeria has revised its NDC, included waste management and water in that, and that was apparently good news. But my question, and this is to Dr. Shasore, is about how are these commitments consensus-driven? Is it based on consensus with stakeholders? It requires all stakeholders to play their roles. How are, for instance, extractive communities carried along in this Nigeria's commitments to the NDCs?
When you say consensus-driven, you mean internally within Nigeria? Is that the question?
Yes, they're like nationally determined contributions.
Okay. Well, that is a very detailed. The NDCs are driven and led by the Ministry of Environment, so I don't have that level of detail. But I do know that it goes through quite a lengthy process. I understand that we have submitted our NDCs globally. I think we're one of the fewer first countries to do that. So I do think that that's consulted widely, but to be honest, I don't have that level of information. But in terms of consensus globally, and this is the interesting point, again, Nigeria signs up to things. You said that earlier. We sign up to a lot of things, but what does it mean for us? And I think this is the clarity that we have to start to seek with our partners globally, because, again, we are asked to make these nationally determined contributions, but really, in terms of emission, as I said, our contribution as a continent to global CO2 emissions is 0.55%, whereas we're only generating 81 gigawatts of power. The United Kingdom generates 108 gigawatts of power. A country cannot develop based on sharing 81 gigawatts with 53 other economies. Again, if we were to triple our energy production, I think we would still only contribute 0.6% to global emissions. So really what we are doing is a drop in the ocean. So in terms of consensus, our partners in the world are not including us in decision making. Our partners in the world are not seeking a change that is just or equitable for us. So again, we've just talked about communities that are deprived, that need development, they need jobs, they need work. For us to do that, we need to generate more power. In order to do that, we'll need to explore gas safely. So I just didn't have that level of information with respect to the
Yes,
NDCs.
I think it's a more of a governance problem in terms of carrying stakeholders along, because it's not just the government of Nigeria that is making this commitment. There are a lot of stakeholders who are going to make good on this commitment, and not just a commitment to international partners, but commitment to ourselves, because these are like transitions that would affect us and how we behave, and would have knock-on effects on the environment. So not just in emissions, but certainly in terms of impact on the environment as well. For instance, like gas flaring would have definitely impacts on the communities around where the gas flaring is happening, far more than it has, as you mentioned, on global emissions. But I'll come back to you, because maybe you can articulate more in terms of our post-oil vision. Just let me go to Mrs. Masade Olowola and ask about women, because I think Martha mentioned something. It's like we're talking about cleanup, resilience, and she doesn't see women being included in the picture. Do women have a role to play? What role can they play? Are they playing a role currently that's not been recognized, for instance? And how can that be mainstreamed, recognized, and compensated?
Thank you. I noticed that you call me Ms. Masade Oluola, but you call the Reverend Nimo. Do I look older than he is? Okay, so before I answer my question, I wanted to just talk a little bit about the NDCs and, you know, the comment that Dr. Shashari had made. It comes at the, you know, multinational level, and then countries have to drive it for businesses and the individuals within to then play their part. And that's where I'm coming to with regard to reporting on stuff like the NDCs. Communication is obviously a huge issue, because many people who ought to feed into the report that the government sends out don't actually know about the NDCs. And I've been in a number of those meetings, and that's why I mentioned earlier that, you know, so we've had conversations, because we at CSR in Action, one of the core things that we do is write reports. And they've said, okay, how can we even get the data from the companies to feed into the NDCs? And then I'm just thinking about even the government agencies themselves. Like, are they even measuring their emissions or anything like that for them to even contribute to the report, to the NDC? So it's my concern is that holistic approach to dealing with these things. So when we sign up to these things, it's a fantastic thing, but what is that, you know, strategic plan to make it happen, to make it work the way it ought to, rather than just joining up and then saying we are reporting, but is the reporting adequate, really? So to your question around women, I think that Madam Abani spoke extensively about women and some of the challenges that women face in extractive communities, and it's the challenge that women face in general. Up until a couple of years ago, as an organization, we intentionally avoided dealing directly on women issues, okay? Because I always thought, you know what? I mean, I grew up in Lagos, we're city girls, so anything is possible. When you grow up in Lagos, you can do the same thing that the men do. Yeah. There are hardly any limitations, except for cultural limitations that your parents may have brought from wherever they've come from, and that you allow yourself to imbibe. Okay, but I've come to realize that it's not actually the case that women can be whatever they want in this very country that is Nigeria. I mean, I've met people who work within public institutions that say, oh, I'm in PR, PR protocol, but I can't actually go out to meet special guests because I'm a woman. I've also had situations here in Abuja where we had a slight issue with our venue, and everybody was getting worked up. I mean, we paid for it first, and when I stepped in, I mean, it's my event. I am the organizer of our annual Sustainability in Extractive Industries Conference, and the man said to me, "Madam, don't raise your voice, you're a woman." And and so I know that this is what tends to happen. So this culture of silencing of women is prevalent in every aspect of it. And the truth is that according to a World Bank survey, it's women that are most affected by these things because we're most affected by environmental degradation. I mean, women are the ones who cook, for instance. Women are the ones who most times go to the farms. Women are the ones who look after children. I mean, how many women here who are married who would say, no matter whether they even have jobs or they're the breadwinners of their home, who still don't have primary responsibility for the family? I mean, I was talking to a very well-known woman yesterday. She's constantly on the move, and she says, I just returned from a trip to one other northern state, and it's my husband picked me up, but he's been at home alone, and I still have to cook for him. It's past 9. So we have to deal with all of these things, and then when we get opportunities within the space, it's very lowly paid opportunities. When we were researching for our CES, our community engagement standards, we had a rule that we would have at least a third of women in the room. We could not find a third of women to bring into that room. It was either the community leaders that we met who were men said, there's no need to have them, or the women who were even invited thought they weren't good enough to be in the room. So women have a decisive role to play, and it's instructive how unseriously, really, I would say, the government takes it. Any need to address it, but there is need to address it. So there is need for a conscious effort to include women in the room, because these things affect women more, and women need to lend their voice. You cannot know the perspective of a man and a woman by being a man in the room. There needs to be inclusion for women in those spaces, in community discussions, at the political level, and any other level where decisions are taken, because, and then I think that there's also some responsibility on the part of women, because they are also enablers that women are also not taking advantage of. So I think that, we need to understand that whether, no matter what may be the reason for women not actually advance, whether it's cultural, whether it's religion, the times are changing. Women are having to be as responsible as men, financially in the home. And so women need to be able to understand that they can actually be more, ask for more, and be present more. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, do we have one or two questions from the audience? I'm going to take 3 questions, 2 questions from women, 1 question from a man.
That makes sense. That's fair enough.
So we are going to try and balance what is not happening in the community. We'll balance it here at the Yar'Adua Center. Okay, so please come forward. You raised your hand. Just your name, your organization, just quick question, 1 question. 1 minute.
Okay. Good day, all. My name is Alachuk Bebo Regina. No organization, I was invited. She said something about...
Dr. Shasori?
Yes, please, sorry. She said something about Nigeria being prepared for the end of oil. But then again, we know Nigeria as a country is characterized by so much. She made mention of attitudinal problems and a whole lot of other things. But then again, if I can remember correctly, in 2004, I think during the global financial crisis, was it 2008? Sorry, 8, yes. There was a collapse in the price of oil. In 2014, it moved from 6.3% to, I think, 1.9 or 3, thereabouts, in the first quarter of 2018. Like, there are just many things that characterize this oil collapse. We know the modern world, or what we call the rich world, are going into these electric vehicles where there will be no need of oil. And then most of our government revenues are generated from oil. So how do you intend to do this? Nigeria, on a personal note, I think we are not ready for a global shock. We're not ready to absorb that kind of shock. So what do you think?
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to be very biased towards young people. And then, where's the other woman? that wants to say something, because we have taken the man now. So, okay, please come forward. Quick, 1 minute.
All right. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Once again, my name is Yar'Adua. I'm currently a youth corps member. I'm serving under the Ministry of Budget and National Planning. Oh, okay, fine. Yes, I'm directing my question to Mr. Bassi, the called you Reverend. I read your article today on politics and you want to talk about blue economy, and I was very much fascinated. But I was hoping to hear how the issue of a developing country as Nigeria would deal with the issues of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement that has started in January this year. And knowing fully well that other countries can begin to bring in certain things into the country that can affect our own dealings. And there are benefits to this, oh yes, but then how will this affect the extractive as well? Because imagine oil coming from another country, how will this also affect us? Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. My question is, my name is Zipporah Ja. I'm a core member. I took two things, gas flare and end of oil. Now, the problem, number one, you said gas flares. Please pardon me, I'm nervous. Gas flares affect the environment, right, and every other thing. And there's a need to convert gas flares to reduce the power. Now my question is, we are trying to get petrol, kerosene, and gas from the refining. The refining process is what brings the gas flare, right? Which has created a problem. In trying to get a solution, we've got a problem. Now, whatever it is that is going to be created out of the gas flare, is there a provision where it will not also be another problem? And then is there a way to tackle it when it now becomes a problem? Because we have this tendency of concentrating on the now than later. And then if you say end of oil, why then do we need to convert it if it's going to finish after all?
Thank you. Please, a round of applause. Okay, two minutes closing remarks and answering your questions that have been directed at you. Thank you. We should start from that. See, this is how you know that he is my Oga. Okay, so Bekeme, please.
I don't know if there was any question directed at me. I don't think there was any question directed at me, but there were a few things that I thought that I would say. So I think that, beyond oil, but, beyond oil, just to touch briefly on her question, I don't think that for the next 40 years or so that, we're going to totally stop oil production in this part of the world, to be honest, unless we're forced to. Seriously, unless we're forced to. I actually don't see it happening just in the immediate, because, it's bringing certain value to the country, and if harnessed properly, it can continue to bring some value. When it comes to renewable energy, that's the one thing, because in 2015, thanks to Christine Kay of the Heinrich Böll Foundation, I was one of 5 who were asked or invited by the German government to witness that energy transitioning that I talked about, Energiewende. And, it was the same thing that I thought. I just thought, what, eventually we'll get there, but before we get there, what do we do to manage the resources that we have? So having said that, there are a few things that I think that we must do to be able to progress as a country beyond reliance on oil. One, a national identification system, which fantastically is ongoing, but the bad part is communication has always been one of our challenges, and many people don't even understand why everybody is harassing them to go and get a national ID, but at least we're on it. Secondly is transportation, particularly the rail system. If we are talking about manufacturing, agriculture, and all of these things, if we look historically, we see the value of that, even just transporting from one end to the other and reducing reliance on individual transportation. That would be very useful. Although I did see a video recently of our rail system where somebody was video say, see all of us tight like sardine inside this place. But but the thing is, I fought it. I argued it because I lived in the UK for approximately 3 years, and we were like sardines coming back from work. But I think that it's the expectation. Really, you need to tell people, this is your seat or this is your ticket. That is, if that's the case, this is your ticket doesn't mean that you will sit, but you get on the train from point A to B. Although it was, from what I hear, an over 2-hour journey. Thirdly, she's talked about energy. Obviously, that speaks for itself, and she's talked about extensively. A police and judicial system. There's nothing that we can do if we don't have a system that we can trust to protect us. The public service. The public service is... okay, I wouldn't be positive today, but it's supposed to be the lifeblood of, it's supposed to be the veins, really, of the nation. And, there's need to reform that service to work effectively for us as a country. And then, of course, security. It's linked to the police, but it's beyond that. And it's not just security within. It's security outside as well, like protecting our borders as well, because, we constantly have people coming into Nigeria and just being. We already have a population that we can hardly manage, and security is, is key to address. And finally, to Niger Deltans, I'm from Edo State. We can force ourselves to be South-South. I don't know how Niger Deltan I am, but I did go to school in Delta State. And, the Delta State that I went to over 20 years ago is not the Delta State that I know of today. But when I keep on hearing about these things, and we're talking beyond oil, I think that the Niger Deltans need to really mentally move beyond oil. The region is made up of intelligent, focused, go-getting people. I think that truly there's the opportunity to prove to the rest of the world, the rest of the country, that it's not really about the oil, because there's fantastic opportunity, there's potential in Nigeria for anything that we want to be. And it's just a little advice. I'm not saying that the government shouldn't perform its due to the Niger Delta. I'm just saying that I know that every time there is adversity, there is opportunity for improvement to be a better version of yourself. Thank you.
Just to say, to begin with, in terms of the production of oil, I think the question was probably to me about the post-oil and our preparation for it. There's nothing wrong with being an oil-based economy like ours, and I don't think there's anything to be ashamed of. I think what we have to focus on is how to use it beneficially for ourselves, make it safe for our community. So I'm not ashamed of that. And don't forget that oil really it forms the basis of a lot of manufacturing, and manufacturing means jobs for people like us. So it's the basis for the petrochemical industry. We can use it for so many different things. Fertilizer, over 20% of our economy relies on, produces, or 20% of our GDP is from agriculture. So there's that. Nothing to be ashamed of, and I really think we use it to beat ourselves around the head a lot. We are an oil-based economy, and that's it. That's fine. In terms of preparation for a post-oil world, well, I mean, at the moment, again, we acknowledge it, it's going to happen, it's happening, whether we like it or not, but frankly, we ought to make sure that it happens on our own terms as well. We have to be involved in that decision-making, and frankly, we are not. You talked about signing up to things. It's very nice to sign up to things. Guess what? The Paris Agreement, we signed up to that in 2016. Under the Paris Agreement, the world promised that it would support countries like ours with global climate, there's a global climate change fund or facility countries like ours were supposed to be supported to transition. I think it was $100 billion that was committed, and we've seen none of that. So that's the post-oil world for you. Apart from that, Nigeria is developing an energy transition plan. I know everybody's going to roll their eyes and say, yet another piece of paper. But I expect that to be done, to be finalized in another couple to 3 weeks. We will be presenting, we'll be one of 2 countries in the world, I think. I can't remember the other country, maybe India. Presenting its energy transition plan at COP26. Now, the energy transition plan, the key features of this is to help us from a data perspective. Everybody talks about not measuring things, we don't know anything, we don't have the basis, we're all useless people. But in Nigeria, this is what we think, and that's not true. And we really ought to stop believing that about ourselves. So it's supposed to be based on data. The features of the plan is to show us how we will get to universal energy access for all of us, which is an SDG target by 2030, and then also how we will transition from net zero to net zero emissions by 2050. So it's the 2 things, the 2 priorities that we ought to achieve. We need we need energy. We need all of us to have access to energy to be a productive society. But at the same time, there's climate change going on in the world. We have international obligations, and we're going to work towards transiting. We want to do all of these while ensuring, the third part of this is to ensure that we are able to industrialize, because industrialization means jobs for all of us, which is what we really need. It means a prosperous and economically prosperous society. If we cannot have that, then we have to have a serious conversation with our partners about net zero emissions and off-grid, etc. Now, just to say, the preliminary view of the transition plan at the moment, of the energy transition plan, is that we may have to, in terms of spending and how much it will cost, it may cost us about $400 billion more than the existing spending that we do in the power sector. But again, this is not a final document, and we should be seeing it in a few weeks. But the point is that we acknowledge, we anticipate what is happening, we are preparing for it. The other thing that will happen, the key features of the plan, is that it will require us to transition to at least 30% of renewable energy, solar, in fact, as part of the energy mix. At the moment, I think solar is 16%. So in that world, we'll be increasing it. But in order to increase our solar mix, we've got to underpin it with gas. Gas is what is going to help drive it. So there's that. And the other thing we might find is that we're not able to transition to net zero emissions by 2050. And then we can have that conversation with our partners that, guys, this is not working for us. So there we are. Thank you. Thanks so much.
Two minutes. Oh, why? Okay. He just gave me 2 minutes. It takes 20 years for a mining license lease to expire, and we are talking about ending gas era or ending oil extraction in Nigeria by 2030. We just have a recent renewal of license on OML lease 118, for instance, which is the Bonga oil field area, and that will take up to that. And then the PIA, Petroleum Industry Act, has also earmarked 30% of its revenue for deep ultra sea and other basins. Talked about the Anambra, Calabar, and the Chad Basin oil exploration, those frontier exploration that they want to carry out. And so when they do that, I'm talking about, how sincere Nigeria really, is, if they really say that they want to really join that group to say they are ending, oil extraction. And then now it is for me, while I'm sitting here, my introduction was that I'm a maybe environmental activist and all that, which means I work with communities. So it is for me to give communities this advice now. Nigeria ending oil or not ending oil, there's an opportunity. Be that as it may, that the PIA does not really represent what we expected as CSOs, and that the conditions or provisions made for communities are quite minimal. But that can serve as an engagement tool for communities now to engage with the IOCs, the settlers, as I said. And why am I trying to bring up this? By the time they now bring in transparency into whatever they want to do, within this short period they are going to leave, as in oil exploration will be on, and come up with this metric system we've been talking about, communities will be able to actually know what is theirs in that percentage that they're actually bringing in. And so for me, I want to advise communities to leapfrog into the transition era now. They don't need to wait for Nigeria, but start looking at that. And that is to go with the demands they will be demanding from the settlers when they come in with their own developmental plan. Yes, it is stated there that they determine who is an oil-bearing community. It is also there that because there's a clause that states that whatever development they want to do has to be in tandem with what they want and not even what the community wants. But I want to tell us here that communities still have their social license. Communities can still make the place bearable or unbearable for whosoever that is coming in to mine oil. And so communities can still put this forward to say this is what they want. And before this time, there are some community members too that benefit from maybe educational support from the IOCs. Now is the time for them to demand for the type of scholarship they want. Issues around artificial intelligence is ongoing. This is what people need now. There are areas that Nigerians are lacking in human capital, development or human resources. This is the time for communities to start rising up to it. The issue about going to study oil and gas, petroleum and all that is not really a necessary thing now. What are you talking about in terms of your maybe medicine, other science-related area, agriculture, tourism? There are so many things that we need that can keep us going. It is also necessary for us to look at other economies that have been operating and thriving without oil. Those non-oil-bearing economies, how did they really thrive and what is really keeping them afloat? These are the things that we need to look at so that we don't really get ourselves caught unawares in whatever transition there's going to take place. And then communities need to join in the transition so that they are not left behind in whatever processes that follows that. Thank you.
Well, let me begin by saying that I don't believe that Nigeria has 40 years more to stay hooked to crude oil and gas. We don't. Now, whether we like it or not, if we persist, if the world persists in this path, we're not going to, those infrastructure are going to be smashed by climate change to start with. You see the ferocity of storms, of hurricanes, of cyclones we're having, the infrastructure along the coast be gone. And in fact, it's estimated that if the Niger Delta, for one, is a naturally subsiding environment, so it's sinking on its own. So you have a net 1 meter sea level rise, up to 90 kilometers from the shoreline will go underwater. That means almost up to Benin City will be underwater. So if all that territory is underwater, where is the oil going to be coming from? So this is the time for us to seriously invest in building resilience and shifting away. We have to show leadership in Africa. I know Nigeria has not contributed. I read the recent article by the Vice President in Foreign Policy magazine, and the arguments he made are very compelling, very politically compelling. But we cannot say because we are contributing little or no emissions, therefore we're not going to do anything. The basis, we have to go back to the Conference of Parties. When climate negotiations happen, we have to change the argument. Unfortunately, since Copenhagen COP and Paris COP, the Paris Agreement, we've moved away from the direction that will actually tackle global warming. What the world is doing now, called nationally determined contributions, means countries can say this is how much we are ready to do. And it's not legally binding. What is legally binding is a reporting pattern. So if reporting is legally binding, I mean, if what is binding, not even legally, what is binding, you must report in this year, report in that year. Whether what you report is going to be practiced or not is anybody's guess. So what I think we should do that would help us, help our communities, is for African nations to regain the spirit of negotiation that we saw in the past at the COPs, where the common but differentiated responsibilities clause or principle is elevated. Somebody created this problem. Somebody put all the carbon in the atmosphere. Somebody took the carbon budget. Now, we didn't. And somebody should pay for it. And so rather than waiting for $100 billion US, which is not forthcoming, as Green Climate Fund, we should be demanding for a climate debt. The global north owes the global south a climate debt. That's the money we can use to build resilience, to restore our communities, protect our shorelines, and what people like Martha are doing, developing nurseries for mangrove trees and getting women to prepare to take part in protecting the shoreline should be elevated and supported. If we just say, okay, we're going to keep on using crude oil to make money, crude oil economy has proven to be a voodoo economy for Nigeria. You don't do anything, the money comes in the bank and you spend it. Now there's no money coming to the bank, you borrow it. This voodoo economics is not productive. It's not going to help anybody. So we have to really wake up and look for, and this thing has to go, that's why I'm very happy about this exercise, going to the communities. Because we have to learn how to engage policymakers. I've heard today little information going down to the grassroots. So we have to find a way to pull that information and to force policymakers to hear the grassroots. Because that's where the pain is, that's where the loss is, that's where the ache is, and we can't carry on this way. And if Nigeria really wants to make money, the last dash, to make the last bit of money, Beckham, please keep down your microphone. Okay. No. I thought you wanted to interject. Sorry. Now, what I'm saying, if Nigeria really wants to make the last batch of money from oil to invest in the transition, they should stop oil theft. As much oil as is being officially exported is also being stolen on a daily basis. This is not done by villagers. It's not done in bottles and buckets and drums. It's an industrial business. This is not for me. I'm quoting, I've heard it said by top politicians. The last one I heard was from the former Minister of Finance, who is now the Director General of WTO. She said 400,000 barrels of oil are stolen every day. If we know that this is happening, why don't we stop it? If you stop it, that's more revenue to the government. The money is not being stolen by poor villagers. The poor villagers are suffering the consequences of all this damage. And we need to go back to the communities and let's take it from there. Thank you.
Please, a round of applause. This is the end of the panel session. Thank you, everyone. Where's the camera person? Let's just take a quick picture. Okay, yeah. We're just a bit socially distanced, but still, at least let's see our faces briefly, and then.
For a moment.
Yes.
We'll take this.
All right. Thank you. A round of applause as they go to their seats. So now it's my pleasure to invite the closing remarks for this very engaging forum that we've had. And the closing remarks will be delivered by Dr. Chichi Aniagolu Okoye. That's different from what you have in the program. Actually, we got an upgrade at the last minute. You know, when you get on a flight and they move your class from economy class to business class. So we got an upgrade, and we have not the acting director, but the full substantive director of Ford Foundation, the regional director of Ford Foundation. She's just been recently named. So she's brand new, and we welcome her to the position. Please, a round of applause. So she's the regional director for Ford Foundation West Africa. Prior to joining Ford Foundation, she served as the country director of Water Aid Nigeria. Among her many accomplishments, she was country director of TechnoServe, Girl Effect, Oxfam in Nigeria, and the director for the Canadian International Development Agency Program Support Unit. Dr. Anyagolu Okoye sits on the board of a number of citizen sector organizations in Africa and has consulting experience, which includes experience with the EU, UNFPA, and UNESCO. She obtained her bachelor's degrees, master's degree, and a PhD in sociology from the University of Nigeria, Nsukka, University College of Cork, Ireland, and University College Cork. I think there's another one there, but same university. But you've got your master's and PhD as well from those two. We're very proud to have you this morning. Please, a round of applause as she comes to deliver.
Good afternoon, everyone, and I'm really delighted to be here today because natural resources and climate change is an area of particular interest to the Ford Foundation because we recognize that Nigeria and many developing countries are resource-based countries. Natural resource-based countries, and many of the challenges and issues that we face are as a result of, the management or lack thereof of natural resources, which of course has resulted in climate change. And so this topic for me and for the foundation is really critical because of its implications for communities, for livelihoods, and the environment. So I really commend HOMEF and the Yar'Adua Foundation, for taking on this topic. I think for me there are two major issues why this is important. I remember many years ago working for one of the projects of the European Union. I went to the Niger Delta and we had a meeting with civil society. And everybody was talking about, the impact of climate, the impact of oil on the environment, pretty much the same way we have today. And it was very passionate. It was civil society people. And everything was about, it's our oil, it's our communities, because that program was around accountability and trying to get government to play its role. And the civil society organization, very surprisingly for me, was like, why should people bother how we spend our money when it's our money, it's our oil? If we want to steal it, it's not a problem. And I reminded them in that workshop that today's oil was yesterday's cocoa. Today's oil was yesterday's palm oil. Today's oil was yesterday's tin. And many of those communities, that once fueled Nigeria's economy are today, with products that are not as productive. And I said that a time will come when we will be having a conversation around what will happen to the Niger Delta when the oil is no longer there. And it's amazing that about 10 years later, I'm standing here today to talk about this. I agree that oil isn't going to completely disappear, in the same way that palm oil has not completely disappeared, or coal. I come from Enugu State, so we were very proud of our coal. Today is just a nuisance because you can't get water because of the coal. So we recognize that a time comes when we have to have certain conversations. We didn't do the transition very well from agriculture to oil. And that's why many of the communities that were agrarian, that were producing this cotton and cocoa and the rest of it, became completely impoverished, when we transitioned to oil, even though we ended up with more money with oil. It's important to plan. And so at a conference like this, we have to ask the right questions. The UN conference on climate change is coming up in a few days. So this is really apt. And it would be good to see what report Nigeria is going to be presenting in that conference. But I think that what we need to be asking ourselves is, if the oil companies that we have talked a lot about today are divesting from fossil fuel, and we could not hold them accountable when they were in our communities, how are we going to hold them accountable when they are now divesting from it? If we couldn't hold them accountable to clean up our environment when they were actually physically there. How are we going to do it when they are no longer there? And that takes us right back to government. Because the honest truth is that Nigeria or Africa or developing countries are not the only ones who produce oil. But the impact of oil, on our environment has been devastating, precisely because of the nature of engagement that we have had with them from our government, and the nature of how we have looked at our natural resource. Norway has oil. They don't have the same type of environmental issues that we are talking about. So our conversations has to be around what will our government, how do we hold our governments accountable? How do we get our governments to have the right policies, the right programs, and the right engagement with extractive companies and our communities in a way that is beneficial to us as a people? That's one of the first questions we need to ask. The second question we need to ask is, the policies that we do have, are they going to be useful policies for us, or do we have to rethink them in order to ensure that as we transition from oil, that we're going to be ready for the change that is going to come? We're not in such a bad place, because the reality is that extractives will always be relevant to Africa, to Nigeria. We may be transitioning from oil, but we still have gas. We may be transitioning from oil, but a lot of what is required for industry, you will still find in Africa. Mobile phones, the materials for mobile phones, for industry, for electricity. We still have a lot of those raw materials. So the question is, how are we ensuring that we are taking advantage of that? That we are positioning ourselves, to not also remain second class in the things that we do own. I think that these are the conversations that we have to have going forward. It's important to have the conversations around the cleanup, around the what is happening already. That's extremely important, and we have to keep having those conversations. But we have to make sure that we don't end up doing what we have always done. We have to do it differently, more efficiently, and more effectively. And so for me, civil society also has to get in the program. They have to change their language. They have to change their understanding of what it means to be in a transitionary period. If we look at the fact that oil may still be relevant for the next 30, 40 years today. So there are years today. Civil society has to get ready for what it means today for 30, 40 years. So we're not always playing catch up. I think it's extremely important that we do that. We have many opportunities. We also have to recognize that during this transition period, as the oil companies diversify, we also are going to get less money. That's the reality. So we're getting less money because the money did come from their endeavors. And so what does that mean for us in terms of really being able to take care of our environment? I'd like to end there, but I would like to say, as I end, that it's not always a bad story. It doesn't always have to be, them and us. It's not always, the good guys and the bad guys. It's about a partnership of how we can get government, private sector, civil society, and communities working together in a way that protects the most vulnerable, in a way that protects communities, in a way that protects livelihoods. We really need to start thinking in terms of partnerships. That's not to say that we shouldn't hold those who need to be held accountable. That's part of the partnership. But we have to do it in a way that ensures that we are talking to each other, not at each other, and in a way that ultimately results in the empowerment and the enablement of our communities. Thank you so much, and I hope that we can do something really good with this going forward.
All right, a round of applause, please. We have come to the end of the program today. I just want to say thank you to everyone for showing up. Thank you to the Ford Foundation for the kind support for this program and for a lot of the work that we're doing specifically also around gender. I want to thank HOMEF for the fantastic work they're doing with us on environmental justice and some of the work that they're doing in the Niger Delta too as well. I want to thank all the panelists who showed up today, some coming from so far, from the community, but they were here on time and obviously made very good contributions. I also want to thank everyone who's showed up today for the event. We have lunch for you. Huh? Oh yes, let's not forget the EU. The European Union, who's been our partner, and we've worked with the European Union since 2014 on climate and environmental awareness in Nigeria, and this is one of the priority areas for them. We thank them for sending a high-profile representative and also for their continued support and partnership on the issue of climate advocacy in Nigeria. There will be lunch available in the atrium, so please, as we proceed, we can just orderly proceed to the atrium to have lunch. But thank you and God bless you, everyone. No. We've had our national anthem.